This channel is for mature audiences only. If you're underage on this channel, your parents' mom should have swallowed them or spit them out.
What's good? This is your boy Internal Sadist, and this video is going to be a video that I've been meaning to make for a while because I've been skipping around this video because I've always found it was stupid, and it was like it's just a stupid topic because I hear this quite a lot often from women, and I just laugh at them, especially that Beyonce song, "Let Me Upgrade You," and it just makes me fucking laugh, and it just makes me laugh. I just laugh every single time I hear it. "Let me upgrade you," because my honest opinions on the whole entire "Let me upgrade you" thing is typically women don't upgrade men. Men upgrade women. So for you to actually sit up here and say, "Let me upgrade you," when in fact you're not upgrading anybody, your man is upgrading you, is pretty much a problem. Is pretty much what it is. So at the end of the day, how this works out is your man is upgrading you, and you're trying to pretend like you're upgrading your man, or you can actually upgrade your man. The cold hard reality behind it is typically how it works is it's one of those things where you have to look at it and be like, well, listen to this Beyonce song. Let's figure out how she's talking about "Let me upgrade you" and how how she's figuring out how she can upgrade her man when in fact she's not doing any of the above when it comes to upgrading anything. And the cold hard reality behind it is what it is, and typically women don't really upgrade their men. Typically, when it comes down to it, a man always upgrades a woman. It's the cold reality of the day. Or should I say it's the nature of the beast when it comes down to it. Because at the end of the day, when it comes down to upgrading lifestyles, typically men do most of the upgrading of women when it comes down to it. Which is the cold hard truth. And this is typically why I laugh at women when I hear them say this shit like, "I can upgrade you," or "I would upgrade you," or "I could take you places you've never been," and this, that, and the other, and this, that, and the other. Well, first off, ho, 9 times out of 10, if you're taking me anywhere, 9 times out of 10, I'm probably paying for it any fucking. Well, 10 out of 10 times, I'm probably going to be paying for the trip anyway, because you ain't spend to pay for no damn trip for us to go on. I'm going to pay for the trip for us to go on. So how are you going to take me places I've never been when in fact I'm the one who is actually paying for it? Let that sink in. That's one thing. And the sad part about that, when it comes to lifestyles, women don't upgrade men's lifestyles. Men upgrade women's lifestyles. It's typically how this stuff works. And it's the cold hard truth. Like, when have you actually seen a woman actually date a man and upgrade his lifestyle? Like, think about this shit. Typically, when you see that happens, typically when you see that happen, it's typically one of the women that dated an ain't shit person, and now they're in a relationship, and now they can't figure out how to get the fuck out of the relationship, or how to now they're just stuck in a relationship, and it's one of those things where they're stuck like Chuck. It's pretty much how it works. And the thing that always made me laugh about that is like, well, you got yourself into that relationship. You didn't mutually walk yourself into that relationship. You got yourself in a relationship. You knew the person was like that when you first met the person. Therefore, yeah. And the sad part about that is I always laughed at women who always get themselves into this mess, or always laugh at women who always talk about, stuff, or they try to say, "Oh, I'm not into bad boys" and stuff like that, and come to find out, and it's you're not trying to upgrade nobody's life, this, that, and the other. This person's cheating on you, and you say, "Well, if I ever needed money, I can always ask my baby daddy for money, and he would give me money." But you're not into bad boys. But you can ask your baby daddy for money; he always gave you money. But you're not into bad boys. Well, no, I don't date bad boys. I'm not into that bad boy stuff. Um, you talk to them for a while, and you find out, their baby daddy's in prison. And it's one of those things where, like, you got to sit there and shake your head and laugh at it for various reasons. Like, well, you don't date bad boys. Obviously, you do, because he wouldn't be in prison right now if he was a good person. That's simply how that works. But back to the actual topic I had, because I kind of sort of got sidetracked on that one. But typically, what I run into with a lot of women, like the whole entire song "Let Me Upgrade You," is typically the funny thing about that is when it's all said and done, Jay Z makes more than Beyonce, so therefore, how is she upgrading him? Is pretty much how that works. And the sad part about that, typically a lot of women will sing this song, ain't got no fucking job, talk about how they can upgrade a man. No, the man that comes along with a job or the man that comes along with some money is about to upgrade you. That's typically how this stuff works. It's typically the type of women that you get in this day and age where they talk about they can upgrade somebody. Meanwhile, they're the ones being taken out and being paid for by a man, but they can upgrade a man. Like, how's that work? The sad part about that, a lot of these women I've also listened to and talked to typically have typically never been to a nice restaurant. Like the nicest restaurant they ever been to would be like, Applebee's, Red Lobster, or something like that. So they've actually never been to an actual nice restaurant. So when they actually get to an actual nice restaurant, they don't know how to act, nor do they know how to dress for a nice restaurant like that. It's typically how this stuff works. Typically, you end up with women like that one video that Janky was showing, with that one chick was twerking in front of Salt Bay. Like, think about that. How are you upgrading your man when you're twerking in front of Salt Bay? You're downgrading your man and you're disrespecting your man, trying to live your truths and live your dreams for all intents and purposes. Typically, how that works, and that's the cold hard truth, and that's the sad reality of the day. You typically get a lot of women who want to pretend like they're upgrading their men when in fact they're really not. And the sad part about that is they're not upgrading their men. They're pretty much downgrading their men because the longer their men are with them, the lower quality their men's going to be. Because the sad part about that, women typically, and here's another thing about that. When women say they upgrade men, typically women date men. Women date up. Women don't date down. So for a woman to date down, that'd be the only way they can actually upgrade a man if they date down. The sad part about that is even if a woman's dating down, typically they're dating somebody that's a drug dealer or doing something illegally to get a decent amount of money in, even if they're dating down. So in all technicality, financially, they're not dating down for the fact that he's a D-boy or he sells guns or he sells drugs or he does all this other stuff to get money. So in all technicality, you're not dating down for this fact. You can't sit up here and say you're going to upgrade somebody or you're upgrading people when in fact most of your money comes from a drug dealer or a criminal. That's not upgrading nobody. That's him upgrading you. Because something I've always noticed with a lot of these women, especially all the ones that live in the projects, is they live in Section 8 housing. The rent's like $50 or $90 a month, and they're driving around in an Escalade or a Mercedes. Like, think about this shit. And they're with a man who sells drugs or does some type of illegal crime, basically, to basically be able to afford to buy them this car. And that's always been one of the funniest things I've always noticed about women. And the sad part about that, when it comes down to it, a lot of these dumbass men will put the car in that woman's name because they know it looks better on paper than it does, you know, if they put it there in their name. Because 9 times out of 10, she's working and he's working off the books, or he's a neighborhood pharmacist, or he's a gun tradesman, or stuff like that. For all intents and purposes, is typically how this stuff works. And the cold hard reality behind it is when you run into a lot of these people or you meet a lot of these women, you tend to realize or understand that, yeah, no, these women aren't upgrading shit. They're being upgraded. And the sad part about that, you went from Section 8 housing and catching a bus to driving an Escalade or a Mercedes Benz that your drug dealer boyfriend bought for you. It's typically how this stuff works. And that's always been something I've always laughed at or laughed about when it comes to women, because this is typically how they get themselves into the messes that they get themselves into in the first place, by saying that they're upgrading somebody when in fact they're not really upgrading any damn thing. Basically, they're being upgraded, and that's typically how this stuff works, which is actually pretty funny. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, everybody's always buying into these songs when in fact these songs ain't shit, basically, because I've never met a woman that actually upgraded a man, unless she was a criminal herself, or unless she was a she's used to a certain lifestyle due to her father or something like that, or mother or something like that. Basically, and her mother or her father is a criminal. Basically, it's typically the only time I've ever seen a woman upgrade a man. Outside of that, I've never seen a woman upgrade a man. Typically, men upgrade women. Men are the ones who bring in the money to actually be able for the women to be able to go shopping. Typically, like this is typically why the running joke is, a CNA and a drug dealer is not a power couple. That typically is one of the running jokes that you'll find in the hood is, a CNA and a CNA and a drug dealer is not a power couple, and that's pretty much what it is. Because women believe that that's a power couple for all intents and purposes in the hood. If he's a drug dealer, you're a CNA, or you're doing something similar to that, you're pretty much a power couple. When in fact you're not a power couple. You're just basically a couple scraping by illegally. Because at the end of the day, all it would take is her. All it would take is him getting arrested and her losing everything, even a car. The sad part about that, I've actually known guys who actually put cars in women's names, and when a FBI or ATF comes, they seize the car, the TV, and everything else under the sun, despite the fact that it's in her name, because they know damn well she ain't get the car herself by working as a CNA or working a menial job or a fast food restaurant job. Come on now. That's typically how it works. So you're not getting that car being on welfare. It doesn't work like that, lady. And that's typically how a lot of this stuff works. And the sad part about that is typically you'll run into a lot of these problems when they do this, or typically you'll run into a lot of this stuff as it comes along. The moment you realize that, this bitch is full of shit, or, I just found it funny how, like, women think they can upgrade men when in fact they don't have a job, or they have a menial job, or, they're dating a man with the money, but they're talking about how they're going to upgrade that man who has more money than them, who's actually bringing them up. Like, think about this shit. You're going to upgrade this man who actually has a job, who upgraded you. And the sad part about that, this is typically what I talk about when I say women don't date down. So the only way a woman can upgrade a man is if she dates down. That is the only way she can upgrade a man. That is the only way, shape, or form that a woman would ever upgrade a man, is if she's dating down. That's typically how that works. The sad part about that is women don't date down. Typically women don't date down, so therefore you're not upgrading any fucking thing. He's upgrading you because 9 times out of 10, you're in a relationship where you're being upgraded by a man. You're in a relationship where he's making your life better. So by your dumb logic, he's upgrading you. You're not upgrading him. Because if that was the case, then you should be making more money than him to be upgrading him. And typically women don't like making more money than their men. And typically a lot of the relationships that actually happen typically fall apart for the fact that ain't nobody finna stick around with a man that's broke, or she believes he's broke. Or basically, if like a good example of that is, if a woman makes $150,000 a year, her man better make about 50% more, or 150% more than she does, or about 75% more than what she does, typically, or 125% more than she does. So it's one of those things where it's like, she's making 350. You got to either be making double that one. You got to be making 1.5% of that more. You got to be making 1.5% more than that. I mean, 150% more than that, or you got to be making double that for all intents and purposes. And typically, you should probably be making double that, because typically women like their men to make double what they make. So if they make 150, you better be making $300,000 basically. If she's making 150,000, you better be making 300,000 for all intents and purposes, for her to be happy and stick around with your goofy ass. And that's pretty much what it is. So at the end of the day, even in those relationships, the man's still upgrading the woman. Because typically how this works is, when a woman's in a relationship with a man like this, 9 times out of 10, or 10 out of 10 times, I'm willing to bet you any fucking money, her line is going to be, and I shit you not, My money's my money. Your money's our money. Across the board, I'm willing to bet that. So any of the money she makes, she spends on herself. Any of the money that you make, you spend on her and the household and the kids, basically. So you never really get around to actually ever, you never actually get around to actually, really spending too much on yourself, for the fact that all the money gets spent on her and the kids, and or if you have kids, that is, or her if you're in a marriage, all the money gets spent on her or her wants and needs for all intents and purposes, and you get very little or none of the money for at the end of the day. So you typically end up, let's just say if you bring home 400,000. Let's just say you bring like 4,000 a week home. I mean, we'll just say you bring 4,000 a week home. We'll just say that'll be the number. That's what we're going with. We'll typically say women would typically get like 3,900 of that money, and a man would be left with $100 of that money to spend on himself. It's typically how this shit works, and it's always been how this shit works. And especially if you have children, you'll be left. You'll be happy to even remotely see $100 to yourself as a man if you're in a marriage, when all the rest of the money is going towards bills and the children. And typically how it works is 9 times out of 10, if you're in a marriage, you're probably in a marriage. She probably convinced you to buy a big ass house and put the kids in all these activities, because it's typically how the shit works. So what happens is you're making $4,000 a week, we'll say, and she spends all that fucking money on unnecessary shit, the kids, and activities that you really can't afford, because now she's going over her budget, and you got to pay for all these bills on top of that. So typically how it works is if you're making $4,000 a week, that means $8,000 every pay period, and we'll just say this is how much you make after tax. We'll just roughly say this is how much you make after taxes. It sounds like a lot up until you realize how much you're actually getting out of this. So typically how this works is y'all bought a house because she convinced you to buy a big ass house and pay all these fucking taxes and all this fucking mortgage, basically, because you can afford it, quote unquote. And her money's not going towards none of this shit, because all her money is going towards our personal shit. So typically how this works is now she gets all her money and she gets all your money. And that's pretty much how that shit works. So now that she gets all your money, now the trade-off is, now the overall trade-off is, now the overall trade-off on this shit is, now the overall trade-off on this shit is she's spending most of your money on this shit and she's spending none of her money on this shit. So typically how this works is, let's just say go back to let's just say she makes $100,000 a year. We'll say she makes $150,000 a year. All that $150,000 a year, you're not going to ever see it. The household's never going to see it. It's going to be for her and her viewing pleasures for all intents and purposes. Sad part about that is that $100,000, if she wants a new car, is not going to be paid on that new car. You're going to have to pay for that new car. That's typically how this shit works. So not only she has $100,000 free that she doesn't have to spend on the house at all, that she's spending on herself. When she wants to upgrade to a new car, you got to buy that new car for her. It comes out of your money, not her money. And that's typically how the shit works. If the house needs upgraded, it doesn't come out of her money. It comes out of your money. So you're running into that problem as well, too. So it's typically one of those things where, like, you're paying for all this shit and you end up with like $100 to your name to spend on yourself. So $8,000, we'll say $8,000 a pay turns into $100 for you. And if you have children, you'll be lucky to see that $100 to yourself. It's typically how this shit works, because all the rest of the money is going towards shit that you know nothing about, or trying to figure out why it is and stuff like that. Some invisible savings that you don't got your name on, or and shit like this, or savings, or it's going to a savings account that conveniently has no money in it. If you've ever noticed, I tend to love those savings accounts, those phantom savings accounts, where it's a savings account, but no money's ever been added to that savings account. Like, think about that. Only money that's been ever added to that savings account was the money you took for you to open that savings account. Yeah, that makes great sense and makes for a great, what's up, Billy to go. That makes for a great, concept and a great feeling once you think about it, for the fact that now you're paying for all this shit for no reason. And the cold hard truth is, it's not even worth your time. She's not worth your time in the least bit. Because the sad part about that is, while she was screaming that she can upgrade her man's upgrading her car every year, and he's got to pay for it. And he's upgrading the house as well, and he's upgrading his children's life and her life. And typically, what I've noticed with a lot of these women is, if all the money's not spent on bills and children, that money slides right into her personal account. It's typically how this shit works. Yeah, no, I've noticed that too. And that's funny how that works. It's fine that you buy her this $100,000 car, but if you fix it yourself, she's upset because she can't spend the money, and now she has nothing. Now she has nowhere to place this money at for all intents and purposes. It's typically how this works, and it's sad that it works that way, but it is what it is. It's the nature of the beast, and typically a lot of women hate hate when that shit actually happens because they want to be able to spend the money secretly, or overtly, basically, or covertly, basically, without your knowledge. And that's typically how a lot of women act and is. They want to be able to spend your money covertly, and you not ask any questions about it, and you just better be happy about me spending your money. And it's sad. It's very sad. It's like, it's sickening and sad once you think about it, because typically this is what women do to men on a regular basis when they get into a relationship with them. Because at the end of the day, they were never there to upgrade you. You were there to upgrade them. This is typically the sentiments of the day. Because the sad part about that, even with all this feminist bullcrap that they're always spewing about equality, 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 none of these women really want to upgrade a man. None of these women really want to upgrade a man in the least bit. They want to be taken care of, and they want to be upgraded themselves. It's funny how you always hear these women talk about that they want all this equality and how they can upgrade a man and teach him how to be a better man. But if you ever notice, teaching a man how to be a better man requires her being taken care of and pampered and doing nothing in return. Typically, what happens with that is you'll run into a lot of women in this day and age where they'll talk about how they don't like to cook, they don't like to clean, they don't like to do any of this shit, they don't like doing none of this stuff, but they still want you to pay for all this stuff. The sad part about this, back in the day, growing up, when it back used to be like, the man was paying for stuff, he was paying for you for the fact that the trade-off was you can clean the house and hold down the house. So him paying for you is a trade-off for you being able to clean the house, bear children, and all this whole 9 yards. That's the cold hard truth. So if you want a man to pay for you, you typically got to do all this shit that allows you that gives you the right to deserve to actually be paid for as a woman. Because at the end of the day, once you think about it, because at the end of the day, this is typically what women say: "I'm not to be bought. I can't be bought." Well, the sad part about that is you were bought. You were bought that dinner, and this is typically how this is working. And the sad part about that, women are bought on a regular basis. Anytime you go out on a date with a woman, she might talk about equality, but the first date, you better pay for that shit. The sad part about that is she might talk about she'll cover the second date or the third date or this date or that date. She's not covering any of those dates. She's basically trying to make you believe that she'll cover some of these dates when in fact you're going to be covering all those dates. And that's typically how this stuff works. Women aren't covering too many dates. If they do cover a date, it's one of those things where it was your birthday. And the sad part about that is 9 times out of 10, if it is your birthday, it probably came out of your money anyway. So she's not paying for shit. You just paid for your own fucking birthday. Congratulations, dumbass. You paid for your own fucking birthday. And that's typically how this shit works. And it's one of those things where men tend to overlook this shit or not pay attention to this shit when it comes to women for the fact that they're not used to men aren't used to actually, adapting to situations like this for all intents and purposes because they're still working off the old playbook. So therefore, while they're working off the old playbook, women get to work off the new playbook, and typically they get to pick and choose a la carte style on what they want to do and what they won't want to do. The sad part about that is at the end of the day, when it came down to it back in the day in the 50s and 60s, the 40s and 50s, is typically a man was paying for the date for the concept of courting a woman and her being a homemaker. That's typically what it is. So at the end of the day, a man actually working to pay for a woman was basically the trade-off was she was the homemaker, she took care of the children, and that was it. If you're not willing to do that, you're not going to do that, then you don't deserve to be paid for. It's typically how I feel about that. So if you don't have plan on having children, you can't cook, and you ain't finna clean shit, then what is the point of having you around? That typically goes back to the old adage that Turflinky Monkey said in a video with a bunch of red pillars. And typically how that goes is if you take if you take if you take if you take reproductive system off the table, what does a woman have to offer you? Offer a man that he can't get from a dog, his best friends, and an escort. Like, think about that. What the hell does a woman have to offer that he can't? What does a woman have to offer a man that he can't get from an escort, a dog, and his best friends? Sad part about that is women can't answer that question because I pretty much covered all the bases. And as soon as a woman say cook, 9 times out of 10, I know women my age and older than me, just a bit older than me, like, between, 10 years older than me to about, like, ages younger than me that can't cook to save their lives. I remember I was telling a story in the last stream about I literally had to teach a woman how to boil water. This is the reality of the day. So women can't say I could cook for a man when in fact you can't cook to save your fucking life. And 9 times out of 10, you'll probably order out. It's typically how the shit works. And the sad part about that is we run into a lot of this shit with women saying stupid shit like this when in fact they're not really willing to actually help a man out or do any of this shit, but they want all the benefits. They want all the benefits of being in this relationship, but they're not willing to actually put any force, any effort. And you're right, she is pretty much a tumbleweed at that point. That's basically why I got quiet. I actually envisioned like a Western movie after I said that, and the streets are, got two people with guns on the street about to do a shootout, and there's a tumbleweed that rolls by them. And that's pretty much all she would ever be, is a tumbleweed at that point, because she has nothing to offer you if you took reproduction off the table. Take reproduction off the table. What does a woman have to offer you that a dog, your best friends, and an escort can't offer you? Hell, if you really want to get technical, you want to add an extra thing to that escort ram. What does a woman have to offer you if you take reproductive system off the table that your dog, your friends, an escort, or a sex toy you can't get from a sex toy for all intents and purposes? Like, think about this stuff. What is the purpose of a woman if she's not going to have children? Because the sad part about that, the funny thing about that is typically I've always looked at a lot of these dating apps, and you'll see a lot of these women talk about I don't want to have children. Then they wonder why they're always single. All these young women there in their like the early 20s talk about I don't want to have children, and they're still on a dating site years later, weeks later, months later, decades later on the same damn dating app. Or they're talking about I'm going to uninstall this dating app. I can't find anybody. This app is stupid. And that's simply how women get. Because at the end of the day, if you're not going to offer up fertility, there's a high chance that you're going to be passed over or skipped over for these reasons. If you can't have a child, or you're not in your fertile years, or you're not at the peak of your fertility, or somewhat at least close to your peak of your fertility, you're always going to be picked over or skipped over for this reason. And typically, this is how pretty much men see women for all intents and purposes. If you're not having a baby, then why would I want to be in a relationship with you? What do you have to offer me that I can't get? Yeah, and the sad part about that, typically, if you're in a relationship with a woman, they make death seem appealing, and that's pretty much what it is. Like, they make death seem appealing. Like, you're sitting there thinking, you're driving to work, how you can off yourself or kill yourself. And typically, when you see a lot of married men have already thought about either offing themselves or killing themselves, which is very sad. Like, they're married. This is supposed to be the happiest thing in their life that happens in their life. and are always trying to figure out the ways to kill themselves, or like my favorite one for married men to do is pull the car into the pull the car into the garage, close the garage behind you, take a hose, put it in the exhaust, roll the window up, put the hose through the window, roll the window up, and wait to die. That's typically one of the top ways that men kill themselves in a marriage. Or they'll do something like they'll get an officer to shoot them because they don't want to admit that they fucked up and they can't provide for the family anymore. Or what they'll do is they'll basically, have themselves killed so their wife can get the insurance money. And it's typically one of those things where that typically happens too. So, typically men tend to want to do stuff. Men tend to want to do stuff to themselves that's negative or self deletion, and that's typically how that works. Like I said, I think the top way men kill themselves in marriages is overdoses and taking their car exhaust, putting a hose in it, running a hose to the car, rolling the window up all the way as much as they humanly possibly can go. And they typically turn on the car and they rev the engine so they can pass out from the CO2 emissions, which is actually pretty funny. Well, it's not funny for the fact that you're willing to go that far to get away from that woman. Like, think about that. You're willing to offer yourself to go get away from that woman. It's sad, but it's interesting in a way for the fact that that goes to show you that obviously women aren't the better halves of relationships. Because typically you'll hear women say, well, I might as well date a woman. Then women will go over to date women. Then it'll come running back to men basically for the fact that dating a woman is worse than dating a man. This is typically why you can see lesbians always breaking up at record numbers. And the sad part about that, per capita, lesbian couples are more likely to break up than regular heterosexual couples. And the sad part about that is gay couples tend to break up way less than all of them put together, which is actually pretty funny. So obviously, if two men could be in a relationship forever and a heterosexual relationship can last longer than a lesbian relationship, obviously it's the women in the relationship. The only common denominator in those relationships that are ending at a higher rate are the fact that women are involved in those relationships. And that's typically how a lot of this shit works. And that's typically how a lot of these things play out for all intents and purposes. Because what I've noticed with a lot of men in these situations or these predicaments is women always talk a good game up until they actually literally have to put up or shut up for all intents and purposes, as is typically the term that we use for that, put up or shut up. And the sad part about that, women never want to put up, nor do they want to shut up. It's typically how that works. They want to keep on running their mouths, but they're not willing to actually put up proof or the proof or any of the things to actually improve themselves or make themselves a better version of themselves, or remotely try to make it so that they're good people. It's typically how that works. So what happens with that is, at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, a man upgrades a woman would never upgrade a man. Pretty much how it works. Because like I said, at the end of the day, if you take reproduction off the table, what can a woman offer a man that he can't get from a dog, his best friends, and an escort? Like, think about this shit. What does a woman have to offer a man that he can't get from his dog, his best friends, and an escort? Or traveling to Thailand or, Central America or, another country to basically get some pussy. What does a woman actually have to offer a man that he can't get from either traveling, having a sexcation, or a datecation, or having an escort, having his dogs or his friends around? And that's typically the nature of the beast, and that's typically the conundrum that a lot of women run into. Because they think they have all this power, but if you're not willing to have children or you can't have children, you really have no power. You have zero power. Because at the end of the day, men have all these options to basically, get themselves off. And they'll say, well, companionship. Well, that's what I got a dog for. Companionship, dog. Or they'll say, you need a best friend. This is what I got my friends for. Best friend. Oh, what about sex? Escort, traveling to get sex, end the story. And the sad part about that is when you bring that to their attention, they'll try to bring up costs for that shit to actually explain that away, when in fact it actually costs you more money to be in a relationship with a woman than it is for you to actually travel to another country to get some pussy. It's facts. It's facts. For you, the sad part about that is you can do this. You can do this shit every single week. You can pay to fly somewhere every single week of your life, and it would still be cheaper than being in a relationship with a woman. Because the sad part about that is if you're in a relationship with a woman, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be living paycheck to paycheck. Typically how that works. If you live by yourself, there's a higher chance statistically that you're going to be able to, put away money and put aside money for all intents and purposes. Is typically how this works. What's up, John? What's up, John Savage? John Savage, the Latin lover. What's how you doing today? And that's typically how this stuff works. So at the end of the day, what you're running to is a lot of women who think they can actually do some shit that they really can't. Women that think they have the power when they really don't. The sad part about that, like I said, I could be a man, I could make $50,000 a year, travel around the world, get as much sex as I want, and it still would be cheaper than having a woman in a relationship. And as far as companionship is worth, hell, having a dog and having to pay for a bunch of vet bills is cheaper than having a woman around. It's just facts. Because the sad part about that, what a lot of women fail to realize is women cost a shit ton of money, and so do children. The sad part about that, women and children together cost hella money, and it is what it is. And the sad part about that is women typically will do something to the point where they don't save money, they spend the money, and they spend an exorbitant amount of money, and they typically don't really shop around to make sure that they can conserve some money or save some money, unless it's going to benefit them themselves. It's typically how that works. That's the only time a woman would ever shop around to save money is if she's going to benefit her. Like if she's spending her own money, oh, you best believe she's going to shop around to save some money. If she's spending your money, oh, fuck your money. Your money can go out the window. She'll spend your money. She'll spend your money faster than you can actually light up a fire and start throwing it in a fire. Like legit. Like think of it like this: you take out like $100,000 out of the bank. You build a bonfire. And you just start throwing stacks of $100 bills into the fire. That's typically what you're doing when you're actually marrying a woman or dating a woman or being in a long-term relationship with a woman. You're literally throwing your money in a fucking fire. When it comes to most women in the Western world, is typically how that works. So again, how is she upgrading you? When in fact you're upgrading her. Because the sad part about that is when it comes down to it, you're upgrading her for the fact that if she wasn't in a relationship with you, she wouldn't have these financial means to blow money on for all it. She wouldn't have the money to blow. She wouldn't have the money to blow without you for all intents and purposes. She might can get a man to pay for some shit for her, but typically how it works is she's not going to be able to blow as much money without you for all intents and purposes. That's typically how this shit works. Because she's not finna spend her money on a lot of shit. And if she does, she has no choice but to, because she's living by herself. And the sad part about that is women typically have beta orbiters around them. So typically a lot of the beta orbiters typically pay for a lot of her shit. Like I know women who actually make $100,000 a year. Their rent's like $800, but they don't have any money to pay their rent. So they'll ask one of their beta orbiters or their beta simps around them to basically borrow money from them so they can pay her bills. And that's sad when that's actually happening. You make $100,000 a year, your rent's $800 a month, and you mean to tell me you don't have any money to pay for any of your bills and or your rent. So now you have to borrow money from your simp friend that you're never going to date, that you're never going to give any pussy to pay this shit. Mm. That's a good joke. I like that joke. Mm-mm-mm. And that's typically how that works. Because the sad part about that, I've always talked about, how I always talk about women extending men's lives and stuff like that. Typically about like 3 to 5 years for all intents and purposes, sometimes 10, depending on what it is. But the question is, I've always asked is, why would you want your life extended to stick around to be in a sucky relationship for all intents and purposes? Why would you want your life extended that long to be in a relationship where you're not appreciated or valued and you're being disrespected? Why? Why would I want to live 3 to 5 years longer to be disrespected or treated like shit when in fact I don't need to be treated like shit? And that's one of the funny things I've always said about men. I mean, women when it comes down to it, because at the end of the day, well, yeah, she prolongs your life for 3 to 5 years, but why would I want my life prolonged 3 to 5 years with a nagging woman? Why do I want my life prolonged 3 to 5 years with somebody that annoys the fuck out of me on a regular basis and can't seem to get her own shit straight or get herself right so we can actually be a proper couple? Why would I want to extend my life for something like that? Why? So I could work more and provide for her? What's that do for me? Nothing. Working hard to provide for a woman does nothing for me at the end of the day. It's just facts. What am I getting out of this? Gratitude? No, obviously I'm not getting that, because 9 times out of 10, you're never going to be thanked properly for what you're doing in your relationship. Is typically how that works. And it's sad, but it's so fucking true. Why would I want to sacrifice my life and livelihood, my life, limbs, and livelihood to work myself to death for somebody who don't appreciate me? That'd be like me feeding an animal who don't care if I live or die. Why the fuck would I want to feed an animal who doesn't care if I live or die? All right, see you, Billy to go. I'm about to end this pretty soon anyway. But why would I want to put my life and risk my life and put myself at harm's way to provide for somebody who can care less if I live or die? All I am to that person is a wallet. All I am to that person is, if somebody breaks into the house, you put your life on the line for me. So basically, all you are to that person who don't really appreciate you, who don't give two shits about you, is nothing more than an ATM machine and a security guard. That's all you are. That's all you would ever be. That's all you are. And the faster men figure this shit out, the better off men would be, which is pretty sad. Like, the faster you figure this out, the better off you'll be as human beings when you figure this shit out. All you are is an ATM and a security guard, a disposable security guard. So basically, what you are is an ATM and a rent-a-cop. That's all you are to women. And the sad part about that is men need to learn this and get this through their thick heads, that that's all you are to women. That's all you would ever be to women, is a fucking ATM and a fucking rent-a-cop. The faster y'all figure this shit out, the better off you'll be. Because a woman will never upgrade you. She'll upgrade you to get your ass whooped or upgrade you to take your money. That's the only thing she's upgrading you to do. Upgrading you to basically be able to take your money. And marriage isn't an upgrade. Marriage is only an upgrade to women for the fact that now she's upgrading and now she has more power over your finances. So when she wants to leave your dumbass, she could take half your shit or more. Typically how that works. And if you have kids, you best believe those kids is going with her. Because all she has to say is, he abused me. That's it. That's it. That's all she has to say is, he abused me, or, call the cops and say that you threatened to kill her or some stupid shit like that. Even though the cops know that nothing's happening, they basically have to take you into jail for all intents and purposes, which is sad. Like, think about that. And there was like a case where there was a man who literally didn't even make it inside his door. He was just pulling into the driveway, and there was a cop sitting outside his house. The minute he got out his car and went to his door, the cops got out their car and arrested the man and put him in the back seat for domestic violence. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, his wife called and said that her husband is abusing her and beating her and, like, all this other great stuff. And this man was at work. Even though he was just walking in the door and the cops beat him there, he was still arrested for domestic violence. Like, let that shit sink in. He didn't even get home. He literally left work. Now he's arrested for domestic violence. And this is something I've always found funny when it comes to women who actually pull this shit or pull this stunt. What a lot of women don't realize when it comes to shit like this, if you're going to actually accuse a man of this shit, when you go to divorce him, just know there's a high chance he could lose his job. So when you go for divorce court, who's actually going to pay for your lawyer and actually give you the life you want when in fact you got that man fired from his job from pulling this stupid shit? Because the sad part about that, I've noticed there's a lot of women who try to divorce their husbands and use that same tactic so they can get their kids, end up not getting any money from the man for the fact that he don't have a fucking job. Because now his job fired him for domestic violence. Like, think about that. He's sitting in jail for domestic violence and his job fired him. There's a lot of women that regret taking that route, which is actually pretty funny and pretty sad after finding that shit out. Like, oh, I was supposed to get cash and prizes. Well, you can't get cash and prizes because he doesn't have a job to give you cash and prizes. Well, who's going to pay for my lawyer? Well, he can't pay for your lawyer, so you have to pay for your own lawyer. Because he can't pay for your lawyer. The sad part about that is if you get a man fired from his job, and a lot of times, a lot of women get men fired from their jobs, but we tend to leave that out of the whole entire statistics when women get a divorce and they end up ass out, cash out, basically, because how it ends up working is now that he lost his job, his wife probably makes more than him. So how can you get money? How can you get money from a stone? How can you get blood from a stone for all technicality if you're going to be doing all this stuff to your significant other? Is typically how this shit works. And the sad reality is a lot of women do this stupid shit and they wonder why they end up in the messes that they end up in. They wonder why, nobody wants to deal with them, or, they can't find a good man. Here's why. Nobody wants a person who's willing to divorce a man at the drop of a hat. Then I always hear these bogus ass arguments from women where they'll say something stupid like, well, what if she's in a relationship? Okay. What if doesn't apply to this? So I need you to take your what if and put it back into your pocket and get the fuck out of my face. That's simply how that shit works. What if you ask the person, were you abused? No. Okay, shut the fuck up. See? Clear. She wasn't abused. And the sad part about that, women would always use this excuse to justify getting a divorce. They would use this excuse for other women to justify women getting a divorce. They'll say, well, maybe they got a divorce because he was abusive. No, they got a divorce because they changed their mind like the wind and they no longer want to be with that person. Well, maybe he abused her. He didn't abuse her. Well, how do you know this? Because she doesn't have any welts on her and there's no police reports of her being abused ever, nor are there any reports of her neighbors calling the cops to report that, he's whooping her ass or kicking her ass or kicking her teeth and down her throat, basically. So she wasn't abused. And it's stuff like this that just blows my mind, where you get feminists that'll make up all these extra excuses that don't even apply to the situation, like she was abused, or maybe she was raped, or maybe maybe this happened and this is why her divorce. No, you know why she's getting a fucking divorce. She's getting a fucking divorce because she can. She's getting a fucking divorce because she doesn't know how to make herself happy. Well, maybe it was not his job to make her happy. It's her job to make herself happy. And this is typically how this shit works. It's a woman's job to make herself fucking happy. She can't make herself happy. She shouldn't be in a relationship in the first place. If she can't make herself happy and she needs some external stimuli to make her happy, that sounds like something that she needs to lay on the couch for. That doesn't sound like something that a relationship or a marriage can actually remedy. Nor does it sound like, getting a divorce can remedy that either. It's typically how that works. And women always say something to the extent of, well, she deserves half because she was a mom. Okay, not really, because at the end of the day, if she fucked up on some bills, she's fired. And 9 times out of 10, if a woman's paying bills, she's fucked up on some bills multiple times. So in all technicality, she's technically fired for fucking up on the bills. Therefore, she doesn't deserve to get paid, nor does she deserve to get half, because 9 times out of 10, that half was probably waste on late fees and stupid menial shit that y'all couldn't afford in the first fucking place. Like a good example of that is, it's funny how when a man wants something new like power tools or something simple like that, they can't afford it. But when she wants a fucking $1,000 purse or a $500 purse, they can conveniently afford that shit. Like, let that shit sink in. He wants to get some tools that'll set you back $120, or the case there, the whole entire set will set you back $200 maximum. But y'all can't afford that. But y'all can afford to buy her some, $200 shoes or a $500 purse though. How's that work? Or y'all can afford to get her hair done every week or every month, basically, or every 2 weeks, but you can't afford to get a tool case for yourself as a man. Like, let that shit sink in. Let that shit roll around in your head for a little bit and just digest that shit. You can't afford to get a new tool case that's going to set you back $100 to $200, but she can afford to get her hair done every 2 weeks. Here's a nail done every 2 weeks, and she can afford about like a $500 purse for herself and some shoes that cost like over $100 something. Like, think about that. So at what point is a woman actually upgrading a man? When does the upgrades actually kick in for a man when it comes down to it? Because at the end of the day, like I said, when you take a reproduction, what does a woman have to offer a man that he can't get from a dog, his best friends, an escort, and some sex toys? Or his hand, for that matter. How does a man have to benefit? How does a woman benefit a man without reproductive system, without reproductive rights or reproduction? Well, how does a woman benefit a man that he can't gain or get from friend's dog, a friend's a dog, an escort, or a sexcation, or sex toys, or his hand? Like, think about that. What do you have to offer? You have nothing. You literally have nothing. And as far as stability is concerned, you're really not all that stable. You can't even stabilize yourself, let alone stable. Sad part about that, 9 times out of 10, when a guy met you, you probably weren't all that stable. You probably had some student loan debt. You probably weren't financially unstable. And you probably had a lot of shit going for you that pretty much was putting you in a poorhouse, or you had a lot of habits that kept you in a poorhouse for all intents and purposes. The sad part about that is when you meet a man, he upgrades your life to the point where now you have more problems and more money to get yourself into more trouble. That's pretty much how that works. But y'all have a good one. Be blessed. Have a good day. Treat yourselves like milk. Do not spoil yourselves. And be good to yourselves. And remember, what the hell does a woman, without reproduction, what the hell does a woman have to offer a man that he can't get from a dog, his best friends, an escort, some sex toys, his hand, or a sexcation? Because the sad part about that, even if you did all that shit would be way cheaper than having a woman around you in your household for all intents and purposes. Because like I said, if you make $50,000 a year after taxes, a good 35,000 of that, if not 40,000 of that, or 45,000 of that, is going to be spent on her and unnecessary shit, and her habits, and her school debt. That's it. And buying her dinner and giving her the money to be able to pay for food and shit like that, to stock the refrigerator and pay the bills and shit like that. So what does she have to offer you without a reproduction system, or without wanting to have a child? What the hell does she have to offer you? Like, think about that shit, really. But I digress, and y'all have a good night. Be good to yourselves.